All right, this is a big one. This is looking at the 5 freedoms that are in the First Amendment. So we're going to look at just the First Amendment to the Constitution here and look at the freedoms that it provides, but also some limitations to those freedoms. So first we're going to look at the actual text of the amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So we know they like to run on sentences. This is obviously one big sentence with a ton to unpack. Freedom of speech. Why freedom of speech? We need to allow citizens to express their opinions about the government. And remember, all of these are reactions to things that the British government did against the colonists that they did not like, and they wanted to put these freedoms in place. This also feeds into the idea of popular sovereignty, which means that the people have the power. If they're going to have the power, they need to be able to speak their mind. If the people have the final say, then we can criticize the government. However, there are limitations. Not protected speech, okay? If you incite violence, panic, tell others to break the law, what the courts have deemed as fighting words, essentially if you are trying to provoke violence, you can be liable and prosecuted. And I should pause and note, all of these protections are protections against government action. This freedom of speech in the First Amendment does not protect you from all consequences of your speech. You can say something really stupid and be fired by your employer. There are also terms such as slander and libel, where if it's proven that you publish or say false statements that damage a person's reputation, they could sue you. Also, your speech in schools can be limited. Freedom of religion. There are 2 parts to this. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That purple part there is the Establishment Clause, as noted by the word establishment right there. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That green part there, that's the Free Exercise Clause. So the Establishment Clause means the federal government cannot make laws that endorse one religion over another. They're not allowed to play favorites. The Free Exercise Clause means the federal government cannot make laws that limit your beliefs. You're allowed to believe all kinds of things, and as long as that belief does not, acting on that belief doesn't limit someone else's freedoms or rights, then you're free to believe what you want. This is again in reaction to a lot of European countries had official religions tied into their government. You are free to believe almost anything you want, but if you act on those beliefs and you affect someone else's freedoms or beliefs negatively, then that is a limitation on this First Amendment freedom. Freedom of the press. What does that mean? The press are news organizations or the media. They get protection from government punishment, okay? This is so that the government cannot limit stories that are damaging to the government, because you need to have an informed public to make decisions and vote. And if the government doesn't want voters to know things and blocks that information, then they can hide a lot of bad stuff from the people. So that's why we have this freedom of the press baked in. However, there are issues sometimes where the government has tried to do this in the past, and there have been Supreme Court cases limiting this. So the government's not allowed to punish news organizations for publishing stories it doesn't like. To prevent the press from publishing false stories, though, there are that whole libel lawsuit I mentioned earlier in the freedom of speech section. There are limitations on this. National security issues sometimes allow the government to legally censor the press if it's an issue of protecting our troops in an active war zone or protecting sources of information that we have used when spying on other countries. All right, last 2. Freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. So the right to assemble. This is how we have things like political parties, interest groups, professional organizations can get together to have peaceful protests, actions, or demonstrations. We have a right to assemble as a group. The right to petition means we can write to our representatives, sending letters, advertisements, things like that. We can lobby our government official. We can try to launch boycotts against products. We're allowed to ask our government for things, and we are allowed to assemble to protest things if something's going on that we do not like. So that is what we are looking at here between these 2 freedoms. So these kind of all tie together. You can see how freedom of speech might play into this as well, with the right to assemble and the right to petition. However, there are limits. The government can limit assemblies if they think it's an issue of public safety, where you didn't get a permit and you're shutting down the street, and the government can come in and kind of move you off to an area. But generally there are limits to what the government can do there. The case Cox v. New Hampshire, making sure a protest doesn't block off streets, that there can be times where the government can limit protests. However, they cannot refuse to give someone a permit just because the government doesn't agree with the point of the protest, because that would be limiting the speech and viewpoints of that group. So those are the 5 freedoms that we went over. And if you have questions about any of them, please let us know.